Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahaganath Raghunath Ambitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sapadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorange Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakapa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrindam. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Today we are looking at chapter 7, starting with 729, and we'll do go all the way through chapter 8, verse 9, here in the Bhagavad-gita as it is. 729, we can read these things together. 729. Jaramana mokshaya mam ashritya yatantiye te brahma tadvitu krishnam adyatmam karma chakhilam. Translation: intelligent persons who are endeavoring for liberation from old age and death take refuge in me in devotional service. They are actually Brahman because they entirely know everything about transcendental and fruitive activities. Text 30. Sadhi bhutati bhaivam mam sadhi yagyam che buddho prayana kalapicha mam te vidhur yukta chetashaha. Translation: those who know me as the Supreme Lord, as the governing principle of the material manifestation, who know me as the one underlying all the demigods and as the one sustaining all sacrifices, can, with steadfast mind, understand and know me even at the time of death. Chapter 8, text 1. Arjuna uvacha kim tad brahma kim adhyatmam kim karma purushottama adhibhutam cha kim proktam adhidaivam kim uchyate. Translation: Arjuna inquired, O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What is the self? What are fruitive activities? What is this material manifestation? And what are the demigods? Please explain this to me. Text 2. Adhi yagna katam gotra dehesmin madhusudana prayana kalicha katam genyoshi niyatadmibihi. Translation: how does this Lord of sacrifice live in the body, and in which part does he live, O Madhusudana? And how can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? Text 3. Shri Bhagavan uvacha aksharam brahma paramam svabhavodhyatmam uchyate bhuta bhavodbhavakaro visarga karma samnitaha. Translation: The Supreme Lord said, the indestructible, transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called the Self. Action pertaining to the development of these material bodies is called karma, or fruitive activities. Text 4. Adi bhutam ksharo bhava purushashchadhi daivatam adyagnoham evatra dehe deha britambara. Translation. Physical nature is known to be endlessly mutable. The universe is the cosmic form of the Supreme Lord, and I am that Lord represented as the Super Soul, dwelling in the heart of every embodied being. Text 5. Antakale cha mam eva smaram mukva kalevaram ya prayati samadbhavam yati nashyatra samshaya. Translation. And whoever at the time of death quits his body, remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. Text 6. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajtyante kalaveram tam tam evaiti konteya sadatat bhava bhavitaha. Translation. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. Text 7. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mam enusmara yudhyacha mayarpita manobudhir mam evyashyasya samshayeha. Translation. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna, and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. Text 8. Abhyasta yoga yuktena chetasa nanyagaminaha paramam purusham divyam yati partha nuchintayan. Translation. He who meditates on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me, undeviated from the path, he, O Partha, Arjuna, is sure to reach me. Text 9, final text of the day. Kavim Puranam Anushaktaram Anor Aniyam Sam Anusmaraje Sarvasya Dataram Achinta Rupam Aditya Varnam Tamasa Parastat. Translation. One should meditate upon the Supreme Person as the one who knows everything, as he who is the oldest, who is the controller, who is smaller than the smallest, who is the maintainer of everything, who is beyond all material conception, who is inconceivable, and who is always a person. He is luminous like the sun, and being transcendental is beyond this material nature. Back to 729. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, I'll now read a text and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder and Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Text 29. Intelligent persons who are endeavoring for liberation from old age and death take refuge in me in devotional service. They are actually Brahman because they entirely know everything about transcendental and fruitive activities. Purport. Birth, death, old age, and diseases affect this material body, but not the spiritual body. There's no birth, death, old age, and disease for the spiritual body. So one who attains a spiritual body becomes one of the associates of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engages in eternal devotional service, is really liberated. Aham Brahmasmi. I am spirit. Aham Brahmasmi. It is said that one should understand that he is Brahman, spirit soul. This Brahman conception of life is also in devotional service, as described in this verse. The pure devotees are transcendentally situated on the Brahman platform, and they know everything about transcendental and material activities. 4 kinds of impure devotees who engage themselves in the transcendental service of the Lord achieve their respective goals, and by the grace of the Supreme Lord, when they are fully Krishna conscious, they actually enjoy spiritual association with the Supreme Lord. But those who are worshippers of demigods never reach the Supreme Lord in his supreme planet. Even the less intelligent Brahman realized persons cannot reach the supreme planet of Krishna, known as Goloka Vrindavan. Only persons who perform activities in Krishna consciousness, Mam Ashritya, are actually entitled to be called Brahman, because they are actually endeavoring to reach the Krishna planet. Such persons have no misgivings about Krishna, and thus they are factually Brahman. Those who are engaged in worshiping the form or archa of the Lord, or who are engaged in meditation on the Lord simply for liberation from material bondage, also know, by the grace of the Lord, the purports of Brahman, Adibhuta, etc., as explained by the Lord in the next chapter. Text again, text 29. Intelligent persons who are endeavoring for liberation from old age and death take refuge in me in devotional service. So here it's said that anyone that's intelligent and everyone's in this cycle of old age and death, this repeating cycle of birth, disease, old age, and death. And anyone who's intelligent, in fact, the definition of intelligence could be considered this finding devotional service. If you take refuge in Krishna in devotional service, you are by definition intelligent. That's the definition of intelligence. And so many people are in this cycle. They're caught in this cycle, and they know they're going to have to die someday, and it's not very pleasant to think about. So they don't think about it too much. They kind of say, well, maybe that won't happen to me. That technology is getting so nice these days, and who knows, in 20 years, maybe you can live, who knows, is what they're thinking. And they're putting all their trust in science, and they're saying, wow, science is getting so good. And so they become kind of invested in science because they say, well, I don't want to die, so my God will be science. And I'm just going to count on the fact that they're going to do something, and I can just live forever, and I can just enjoy forever, because they're thinking they're the enjoyer, and that they're living to try to seek out some small enjoyment. They're like squeezing a rock and trying to get some nectar out of it. But this is the secret, taking refuge in Krishna in devotional service. And then you can get out of that cycle. They're actually Brahman because they entirely know everything about transcendental and fruitive activities. So they know that Krishna is the supreme enjoyer. Krishna is the enjoyer. We're just servant of the enjoyer, and we actually find that we can only be happy through service. We didn't know that. Most of us did not always know that our whole lives, but you can only actually be happy through service and things like that. So keeping Krishna in the center and remembering that Krishna is the enjoyer, and trying to act for his pleasure. And then you don't have to worry so much about the results. You can just act in Krishna consciousness. And then you leave the results up to Krishna. You say, I'm doing this for you, Krishna. And sometimes the question is brought forth, do I do my duties every day? Can I just do my duties for Krishna every day? Or do I have to think of him at the same time as I'm doing my duties for Krishna? And it is much better to think of Krishna while we're doing these duties. We have to train ourselves to think of Krishna while we're doing the duties, because at the time of death, it's very important to remember Krishna. And so if we train our whole lives to remember Krishna all the time, then at death, it may not be so difficult, because at death, there may be many challenges. There may be much pain. There may be surprises and nescience, and so many things. So it's very important while you're doing your duties to remember Krishna, remember his transcendental form and appearance. Those who remember my transcendental appearance and activities, Do not take birth in this body again, but attain my eternal abode. Or Arjuna, Janmakarma Chame Divyam Evam Tat. Janmakarma Chame Divyam Evam Tat. No, next time. That's Bhagavad-gita 4:9. So, Brahmasmi, I am spirit. And this term Brahman is being so featured here. And this chapter 8 is starting with Arjuna asking some questions, and Krishna is going to answer these wonderful questions. We're in the middle 6 chapters, so some of the cream of the Bhagavad-gita. And of course, there's Brahman and there's Para-Brahman, and Krishna is Para-Brahman. Para-Brahman. Only entities who perform Srila Prabhupada makes it clear that only entities who perform activities in Krishna consciousness can be called Brahman. And Aham Brahmasmi, I am spirit. I am not, this also means I am not this body. I am Brahman. I am in full knowledge. So Aham Brahmasmi can mean those things. I am spirit. I am not this body. I am Brahman. And I am in full knowledge. So these things go together. Definition. How are these intelligent persons actually Brahman? Why do they know these things? Because they've read the Gita also. Intelligent person has read the Gita and they've surrendered to the knowledge, and they get the peace that's missing in this world. There's no peace for most people in this world. We can't go for, then we get real happiness. We can't go for our own happiness and get there to peace. We can't get to peace, to happiness. We were built to serve lifetime after lifetime. We're only really happy when we're serving. But people have it switched in this material world where everything's upside down. People think they're only happy when they're being served. How many people are going out to fast food restaurant and saying, you know, they forgot their little item, and they're going back to the desk and saying, you forgot my item. Serve me properly, is what they say. I'm angry. And the worker says, sorry, sir, I don't want to lose my job. But we should serve the other person or the living entity, no matter who it is, serve them in some way. And the best way to serve them is to give them Krishna consciousness. Show them the easy process of chanting the Lord's names. It's so mysteriously easy. Some people say it can't be that easy. How many people have said it can't be that easy? I'm going to learn how to do something else. But God wants to give us a pathway to success. Just like we have to give each other a pathway to success, Krishna gives us an easy pathway to success in this degraded age, thanks to his incarnation as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There are 4 ages or yugas that repeat over long, long periods of time. Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvarpa Yuga, and Kali Yuga. And the whole thing can be called the Chatur Yuga. And that's the whole cycle. 4,320,000 years. So yeah, there's no horse sacrifices going on in this age. It's just Sankirtan Yagya, sacrifice of chanting the holy name. And I forgot to say, if Maharaj has any comments, we would all love that very much. Please just interject whenever you would like. Going to text 30 here. Those who know me as the Supreme Lord, as the governing principle of the material manifestation, who know me as the one underlying all the demigods, and as the one sustaining all sacrifices, can, with steadfast mind, understand and know me even at the time of death. And there's so many demigods. You know, there's, 33 million demigods. And some people are new to spiritual life, and they may think Well, maybe I go to maybe I pick the one I like, or maybe if I want this, maybe I go to this demigod. Maybe if I want a child, I go to this demigod, and for a few weeks or something. There's no real scientific process without devotional service, Krishna consciousness, and someone, that's why a good teacher is so important, spiritual master, and also good association, because they will guide you in the right direction and give you some sort of pathway where there's seemingly no path. You're in the forest and it's just brush, and you might be in the brambles and the thorns, and there's so many thorns in the forest, in an unfamiliar forest, but the spiritual master can give you guidance and say, well, go down this path, go this way, turn this way. You won't encounter many thorns, but here, still wear this. So even if you do hit a thorn, it won't get you, and so that's a transcendental guide. And Lord Shiva even worships Lord Sri Krishna and bows down to him, and these demigods are Krishna's children as well. Now let's check out this. I was going to skip ahead to verse 1 of the next chapter. Arjuna inquired, "O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What is the self? What are fruitive activities? What is this material manifestation? And what are the demigods? Please explain this to me." And it's known the Supreme Absolute Truth has three features: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. And here he's called Purushottama. And so Arjuna is not addressing him as a friend, but as the Supreme Person. And then text 2, how does this Lord of sacrifice live in the body? And in which part does he live, O Madhusudana? And how can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? And you hear this term, Jivatma comes up, the Jiva soul or the Jivatma. And Jivatma is considered one of the 5 tattvas, or Vedic ontological truths. The symptom of the soul is consciousness, and the power of the soul is Tatastha Shakti, the power of choice. The 5 tattvas are considered Ishvara, the Supreme Lord; Jiva, the living entity; Prakriti, nature; Kala, eternal time; and Karma, activity. And we're going to be coming upon these terms at the end of 7 and the beginning of 8. Adhyatma, which means jiva or self; karma, which is activity or activity that develops a material body; adhibhuta, ever-changing material nature; adhidaiva, the universal form of the Lord, including all the demigods and their planets in this universal form of the Lord called the Virat Purusha; and Adi Yajna, super soul or Paramatma in the heart. Adi means above, over and above. So going on to text 3, I really like the purport on this one. The Supreme Lord said the indestructible, transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called the Self. Action pertaining to the development of these material bodies is called karma, or fruitive activities. Purport: Brahman is indestructible and eternally existing, and its constitution is not changed at any time. But beyond Brahman, there is Para-Brahman. Brahman refers to the living entity, and Para-Brahman refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The constitutional position of the living entity is different from the position he takes in the material world. So Srila Prabhupada is saying that the position of the soul is different from that position that the soul kind of has to take in the material world. In material consciousness, his nature is to try to be the Lord of matter. But in spiritual Krishna consciousness, his position is to serve the Supreme. When the living entity is in material consciousness, he has to take on various bodies in the material world. That is called karma, or varied creation by the force of material consciousness. Because even the demigods, this human birth is very rare, special birth. Even the demigods sometimes wish to, in their next, when they have to leave the body, as they do, even after many years, they sometimes wish for a human birth because it's a special birth and there's a chance to fast track to Goloka Vrindavan, to Krishna Loka. If you do everything right, this human birth can be a very quick process to get there. As whereas the demigods, I mean, imagine being alive for so many years, and hundreds, thousands of years. And yes, they are maybe enjoying or trying to enjoy, but they know that they're going to have to leave the body too. And so the best thing is to not take another birth. But if we misuse this human form of life, we could go down to the a lower birth, and we don't want that. We want to keep going in an upward trajectory, even if it's small baby steps. It's much better than any sort of backward movement, because there's so many, 8,400,000 species of life. And we've gone through so many species of life, and we've learned along the way, and we've gotten to this human birth. But we could go back, and even Maharaj Bharat, he became kind of obsessed with a deer, and he was very pious, but because he was thinking of this deer, he obtained a deer body in his next life. But as that deer, he was able to remember his past lives, actually. And so he knew where his goal, his proper goal was. In Vedic literature, the living entity is called Jivatma and Brahman, but he is never called Para-Brahman. The living entity, Jivatma, takes different positions. Sometimes he merges into the dark material nature and identifies himself with matter, and sometimes he identifies himself with the superior spiritual nature. Therefore, he is called the Supreme Lord's marginal energy. According to his identification with material or spiritual nature, he receives a material or spiritual body. In material nature, he may take a body from any of the 8,400,000 species of life, but in spiritual nature, he has only one body. In material nature, he is sometimes manifested as a man, demigod, an animal, a beast, bird, etc., according to his karma. To attain material heavenly planets and enjoy their facilities, he sometimes performs sacrifices, yajna, but when his merit is exhausted, he returns to earth again in the form of a man. In the process of sacrifice, the living entity makes specific sacrifices to attain specific heavenly planets and consequently reaches them. When the merit of sacrifice is exhausted, then the living entity descends to earth in the form of rain, then takes on the form of grains, and the grains are eaten by man and transformed into semen, which impregnates a woman, and thus the living entity once again attains the human form to perform sacrifice, and so repeat the same cycle. In this way, the living entity perpetually comes and goes on the material path. The Krishna conscious person, however, avoids such sacrifices. He takes directly to Krishna consciousness and thereby prepares himself to return to Godhead. Impersonalist commentators on the Gita unreasonably assume that Brahman takes the form of Jiva in the material world. And to substantiate this, they refer to chapter 15, verse 7 of the Gita. But this verse also speaks of the living entity as an eternal fragment of myself. The fragment of God, the living entity, may fall down into the material world, but the Supreme Lord, Achyuta, never falls down. Therefore, this assumption that the Supreme Brahman assumes the form of Jiva is not acceptable. It is important to remember that in Vedic literature, Brahman, the living entity, is distinguished from Para-Brahman, the Supreme Lord. I will quickly go to 15:7 just to read that, this verse that he referenced. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. So it's pretty clear that chanting the Lord's holy names, which was really given to us by in the Lord's form as Lord Chaitanya, when he descended in the form of a devotee, he gave us the Maha Mantra very clearly and told us that that was the recommended way in this age, Cheto Darpanam Marjanam, to cleanse the mirror of the heart. And it's so simple that people think it's too simple and they don't give it a chance, but we have to give it a chance. We have to try it for many days, many weeks, even longer, months and years, and keep chanting, and the purification process will happen, because the purity is what we want. We didn't know when we were younger that what we were after is purity. That is so important, is purity, but we can see that we are hankering for that, and the soul is hankering for purity. And through this chanting, you'll cleanse the heart. And just be careful, when we're chanting, we're purifying the heart, and we're trying to grow this bhakti lata creeper, this creeper that descends to the spiritual world until it embraces the Lord's feet, this creeper. But unfortunately, sometimes at the same time, a few weeds are being watered. So just make sure that while you're growing this bhakti lata creeper, you're also removing the weeds at the same time, because it's kind of fertile soil. So we have to be very careful about these things. Now, text 4, physical nature is known to be endlessly mutable. The universe is the cosmic form of the Supreme Lord, and I am that Lord represented as the super soul, dwelling in the heart of every embodied being. So what is this word mutable? What is this word mutable? Well, it just means endlessly changing, liable to change. It doesn't mean able to be muted. Mutable, actually, like a mutation, of course, endlessly changing. So this physical nature is known to be endlessly changing. In fact, our bodies are constantly changing too, aren't they? Every 7 years, every cell is being replaced in the body. And we all had this body of a baby a long time ago. And so we're constantly transitioning and constantly reincarnation, because it's kind of reincarnation. The soul is constantly incarnating or embodying a different body, because the body is constantly changing. So endless change. Text 5, we're going to go on to, and whoever at the time of death quits his body, remembering me alone at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. So just remember only him. He makes it clear, not him and 10 other things or 100 other things. Remember only him, only him. So trying to keep the noise out of our minds and the clutter, and be able to focus on Krishna and his two-armed form as Krishna is very nice. And we also have this two-armed form, so it's very wonderful to think about, and very amazing of these things. That was text 5, and then text 6. Really like this purport. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. And this is one of the verses that Srila Prabhupada quoted a lot. Out of these verses, he quoted, 8.5 through 8.8 a lot. So 8.5 through 8.8, maybe some special attention in our studies. So 8.6 purport. The process of changing one's nature at the critical moment of death is here explained. How can one die in the proper state of mind? Maharaj Bharata thought of a deer at the time of death, and so was transferred to that form of life. However, as a deer, Maharaj Bharata could remember his past activities. Of course, the cumulative effect of the thoughts and actions of one's life influences one's thoughts at the moment of death. Therefore, the actions of this life determine one's future state of being. If one is transcendently absorbed in Krishna's service, then his next body will be transcendental, spiritual, not physical. Therefore, the chanting of Hare Krishna is the best process for successfully changing one's state of being to transcendental life. So we're trying to chant as much as we can, and some of us maybe just starting out and maybe we're chanting a round a day or 4 rounds a day. And hopefully most of us are chanting 16 rounds a day. But even when we finish our 16, we know it's so important to remember the power of the mantra and keep it there close by you and in your mind, even after you finished your 16 rounds. Because it's so transcendentally powerful. It's so transcendentally purifying. You have to put complete trust in it. You really do. Text 7. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna, and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. So sometimes Arjuna is asking, should I just renounce my duties? Can I just go to the forest and leave this crazy war behind? And people are also saying sometimes, maybe I just renounce work. Maybe I just don't work at all. But Krishna's repeatedly saying throughout the book that no, you can continue to work, do your duties, work, but dovetail everything in Krishna consciousness. Do it for Krishna. Follow his rules, follow the 4 regular principles, chant 16 rounds a day, and be a pious person. And that's really the secret. And you don't have to give up. You can do your job, you can do your duty, and you can transform your life in a way that it becomes completely spiritualized by so many things. Hopefully you can visit the temple, hopefully you can associate with devotees, hopefully you can take the wonderful prasadam, hopefully you can offer your foodstuffs to the Supreme Lord, and that way you're going to be dovetailing and keeping Krishna in mind at all times, and you're training yourself for that moment of death, that moment of transition. And it just goes, text 6, and it also on back to text 6, but whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. It just goes to show how powerful consciousness is. It's so powerful that what you focus on, you can actually attain, depending on your consciousness. That means every day we have to carefully control our consciousness. Think about the way a mother might drive a little reckless when she's by herself on the road. But when her baby's in the car, she's very careful. And so she's being careful. Imagine us being careful with our consciousness. And she's constantly thinking of the baby even more than herself. And, turtles can bring up their young by thinking about their eggs. And a butterfly a caterpillar thinks about becoming a butterfly. It transforms itself. So it's kind of like what we're doing. And text 7. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna, and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. And, if we can't remember Krishna doing our daily duties, how can we remember him at a really critical moment of death, So it is very important. In Bhagavad-gita 6:35, Krishna says, "O mighty armed son of Kunti, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it is possible by constant practice and by detachment." Well, it's almost the end of time for today. Sorry for going on so much. I'll try to continue to consolidate and synthesize things. But was there any thoughts or corrections or comments from anybody? Hare Krishna, Jagannath Prabhu.
So I had 2 questions. That's okay. I'll start off with the easier one. So what was this? You were saying something about the 5 tattvas. I was interested in what you were saying.
Okay.
I just didn't know I can't remember what it was.
I'll go back to that. Okay, do that first, and then maybe you could.
And then the second question is, so when you said that it's best to think of Krishna while we do our duty, so is there a process for doing this kind of thing? Is it we think of Krishna in his personal form, or we think of him in his impersonal form as the universal Virat Rupa, or something else? Do we think of him as something else, or do we just focus on our service and hear constantly? What's the best way for thinking of Krishna during our services?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're all trying to do that. And I think it may be a little different for everybody, but by absorbing yourself, by being in it, absorbing in yourself as much in Krishna consciousness as possible, it will happen somewhat naturally. But you also want to kind of steer the ship a little bit and make sure you're on the upward trajectory. So writing things down and making sure you're adding even more Krishna consciousness, or maybe keeping track of things, of how much we're reading and what we're reading, and just observation, just kind of like a diary, really helps. But some of these things will happen naturally by being with the devotees. We're always going to be talking about Krishna, and devotees will always be talking about Krishna. And but also, I think, reading the Krishna book and really getting into the stories, because it's his appearance and activities. So really, knowing his appearance and really knowing his activities. And there's so many great stories in the Krishna book, and you can read that or listen to it. And there's also a children's kind of version of that, which is really fun. So if we know all the stories, and also we tell people the stories, giving Krishna conscious to someone else is a great way to make it stronger for yourself too. It's a great gift to try to give someone Krishna consciousness, to try to explain the process a little bit. And then you're going to get something too. And so the stories are so transcendently wonderful. So tell one of those stories to someone that may not be expecting it. You could even put one of those when you're maybe out in book distribution, do tell a story of Krishna's pastimes, and keep those stories close to your lips. And I would imagine the 2-armed form is the one that he seems to be recommending, but I don't want to overstep my bounds. But I like, I think the 2-armed form, and it's very powerful, very powerful. And Srila Prabhupada, brought in these books, he brought the pictures and he brought Krishna's appearance to the West, because we didn't really know what he looked like. And Srila Prabhupada brought all these things. So he gave us the opportunity to know about his transcendental appearance and activities. So we owe him a lot for that. And these, the five tattvas is right here. You find that Jivatma is one of the 5 tattvas, or Vedic ontological truths. So I do want to look up that word, ontological. The symptom of the soul is consciousness, and the power of the soul is Tatastha Shakti, the power of choice. So the power of the soul is the power of choice. The 5 tattvas are the Supreme Lord, the living entity, nature, eternal time, and activity. So that's just a little bit about that, and we can keep going deeper into those concepts. Does anyone have any follow-ups, additions, or comments on that? Hare Krishna. Thank you all so much. This has been wonderful. Bhagavad-gita as it is. Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada.